Lost in a Christmas Eve blizzard, the cowboy left her cabin, but his 5-year-old walked back. The wind howled through the trees, a chilling cry that echoed across the barren land. The snow fell thick and fast, swirling in every direction, as if the earth itself was wrapped in a white blanket that no light could break through. In the small cabin nestled on the edge of the frontier, the fire crackled, a warm contrast to the storm outside. Inside, Jack stood by the window, his hand resting on the worn wood of the sill. His eyes squinted as he watched the storm, feeling the weight of the blizzard settle in. He wasn't afraid of the cold, or the snow, or the fierce winds that came with it. He had seen many winters, each one as bitter and unforgiving as the last. But tonight was different. Tonight, it felt like the storm was alive, determined to take everything in its path. "Are you sure you'll be fine?" Claire's voice cut through the silence, filled with concern as she stood by the door, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. Her gaze lingered on Jack, her brow furrowed with worry. She wasn't used to this wild frontier life. She had escaped her past, seeking peace in the quiet of this cabin, but now, with the storm raging outside, the safety of the cabin felt too fragile. "I'll be fine, Claire. I've made this trip 100 times. I'll be back before the worst of it hits," Jack said, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying the doubt in his heart. He wasn't sure how bad the storm would get, but he couldn't let Claire and Lily go without what they needed. Supplies for the next few days, food, and firewood. Things he had promised to bring back before the snow buried everything. But Lily, Claire hesitated, her hand resting gently on her daughter's head, the small girl sitting by the fire. Lily's wide eyes followed Jack's every move. She knew her mother was worried. She could feel it in the air, heavy like the storm outside. "Lily will be fine. You're safe here. I won't be gone long," Jack said, trying to reassure Claire. He kneeled down beside Lily, his weathered face softening as he smiled at her. "You stay close to your mom, all right? Don't go wandering off." Lily nodded, but there was a trace of worry in her eyes. Her small fingers curled around the hem of Jack's coat. She didn't want him to leave. She didn't want the storm to swallow him up, just like the stories of the wild and untamed lands she had heard. "Promise you'll come back soon?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's heart tightened, but he forced another smile. "I promise, little one. I'll be back before you know it." With one last glance at Claire, Jack pulled on his thick coat, grabbed his hat, and opened the door. The storm greeted him with a slap of cold air. It was worse than he had anticipated, the wind biting into his skin as he stepped into the swirling white. But he pressed forward, knowing there was no turning back now. Inside the cabin, Claire closed the door behind him, her hand resting on the wood as she sighed. She stood there for a moment, listening to the wind howl outside, her thoughts heavy with worry. She trusted Jack, but tonight she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She glanced down at Lily, who was now sitting close to the fire, her little face drawn with concern. "It's going to be all right, sweetheart," Claire whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. The storm outside was growing fiercer, and with every gust of wind she could feel her own fear tightening around her chest. The hours passed slowly. The wind picked up, howling like a wild animal searching for something to devour. Claire glanced at the clock on the mantel, her eyes moving over the tick of time, each second dragging by as if it were an eternity. She tried to keep busy, but her thoughts kept returning to Jack. Was he all right? Was he close to the supply cabin, or was the storm keeping him from making it? Lily stayed by the fire, her small hands hugging her knees as she stared into the dancing flames. Ever so often she would look at her mother, then back at the door, as if she were waiting for something to change. But nothing did. The wind never stopped, the snow never ceased falling, and Jack never came back. Claire tried to focus on the warmth inside, but her worry was too strong. She checked the door again, her heart racing as she opened it just slightly, peeking into the storm. Nothing but white. The world outside had disappeared behind a wall of snow and ice. The storm had become a living thing, alive with hunger and fury. Time seemed to stretch on forever, and with every minute that passed, Claire's concern deepened. Jack had promised he would return quickly, but the storm was turning into something worse. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was alone now, that something had gone wrong. Lily had long since fallen asleep by the fire, her little body curled into a ball to keep warm. Claire sat in her chair, staring into the flames, her mind racing. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to do something. Without thinking, Claire stood, grabbed her coat, and walked to the door. She wasn't sure what she thought she would do out there in the storm, but she knew she couldn't stay in the cabin not knowing if Jack was all right. She opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The cold slapped her face, the wind howling in her ears, but she didn't stop. She had to find Jack. She had to know if he was safe. But she didn't get far. The blizzard was too strong. She barely took a few steps before the wind pushed her back, the snow blinding her and making it impossible to see. Her heart raced, her breath coming in quick gasps as she turned back toward the cabin. That's when she heard it. A small voice, calling through the storm. "Mama." She turned just in time to see Lily standing in the doorway, her small figure barely visible through the swirling snow. Her little face was covered in snowflakes, her eyes wide with fear. "Lily, what are you doing out here?" Claire shouted, rushing to her daughter, pulling her into her arms. "What were you thinking?" Lily looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "I was waiting for Jack," she said softly, her small voice barely audible over the wind. "He promised he'd come back." Claire's heart broke as she held her daughter close. She had to keep them safe, no matter what. The wind outside howled like a living creature, relentless and unforgiving. Claire stood in the doorway, still holding Lily close, trying to gather her thoughts. Her mind raced, her heart pounding with worry. Lily had wandered out into the storm, despite the warmth and safety of the cabin. The wind and snow were too powerful for someone so small to be outside in, especially at this time of night. She pulled Lily inside and shut the door behind them, sealing out the storm. Inside, the fire crackled softly, providing a little warmth, but it couldn't ease the cold growing in Claire's heart. She sat down with Lily by the fire, her daughter now tucked under a blanket. Claire kept glancing at the door, the feeling of unease deepening in her chest. Jack should have been back by now. She tried to remember the last words he had said to her, the promises he had made. He had said he would return before the worst of the storm hit, but the storm was now roaring outside, fierce and unrelenting. It felt as if the world itself was trying to tear everything apart. Minutes turned into hours, and the storm outside only grew worse. Every so often, Claire would check the window, hoping to see Jack's figure coming through the blizzard, but the snow blurred everything, making the world outside impossible to see. The night was dark and heavy, the kind of night where you didn't know if it was the storm that was swallowing you or if you were simply lost in the endless white. Lily had fallen asleep by the fire, her small chest rising and falling with each soft breath. Claire's gaze softened as she watched her daughter, but the worry still gnawed at her. How had she made it out into the storm? Was Jack okay? Was he lost, just like the rest of the world outside? The questions seemed endless, but no answers came. It wasn't until she glanced at the clock on the wall that Claire realized how much time had passed. Hours. More than a few. Too many. She couldn't just sit there any longer. The fear, the worry, she couldn't keep it inside anymore. Jack had said he would come back quickly, but something was wrong. She had to do something. With a quick glance at Lily, still sleeping soundly, Claire grabbed her coat. She wasn't sure what she thought she was going to do, but she knew she couldn't stay put. She had to find Jack. She had to make sure he was safe. The door opened slowly, the hinges creaking, and Claire stepped out into the cold once again. She barely felt the sting of the snow and wind as she stepped into the blizzard. It was as if the world had gone silent, except for the roar of the storm. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to push forward, the snow crunching beneath her boots. But the storm was too much. It was everywhere. Snow swirling in the air, wind howling like a beast on the hunt. She couldn't see anything beyond the snow, couldn't hear anything but the scream of the wind in her ears. She took a few more steps, but she could barely feel her feet beneath her, the cold seeping into her bones. The further she went, the more the snow seemed to close in around her. She called out, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "Jack!" But the storm swallowed her words, and she couldn't even hear her own call. She reached out in front of her, but her hands met only the cold, biting air. Nothing more. She stopped for a moment, breathing hard, her breath coming out in visible puffs. She couldn't keep going like this. She was too far from the cabin, too lost in the blizzard to make sense of anything. Her thoughts were muddled, panic creeping up her spine. She turned, realizing that she was more lost than she had thought. The cabin was somewhere behind her, but the snow was so thick she couldn't see anything. She could barely make out the faint glow of the fire through the window. She was too far out, and now she had no idea how to find her way back. It was then that she heard something. At first she wasn't sure if it was just the wind playing tricks on her, but then the sound came again, a faint cry, a voice soft and weak. "Jack?" Claire called out, her voice full of desperation. She didn't know if he could hear her, but she had to try. She stumbled forward, barely able to keep her feet beneath her. The wind pushed against her, but she kept moving. She reached the edge of the snowdrift when she saw it, something moving through the swirling snow. A figure. At first she couldn't tell who it was, the snow blurring everything, but as the figure grew closer, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't Jack. It was Lily. The sight of her daughter, standing alone in the storm, sent a jolt of fear through Claire's heart. Lily was barely more than a child. How had she made it this far? "Lily!" Claire cried out, rushing to her daughter. She barely heard her own voice above the storm. Lily was covered in snow, her small body trembling from the cold. Her little face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Mama, I found Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Claire dropped to her knees, her arms pulling Lily close, warmth flooding her chest as she held her daughter tight. "You shouldn't be out here. What are you doing? You could have gotten lost." "I was waiting for Jack," Lily replied softly, her eyes searching Claire's face for reassurance. "He said he'd come back." "I knew he would. He promised." Claire's heart broke as she kissed Lily's forehead. "We have to go back inside. It's too dangerous out here." With trembling hands, Claire stood, lifting Lily in her arms, and began to make her way back to the cabin. She didn't know how much longer they could last in the storm. They needed to get back, and fast. But the wind pushed harder, the snow falling even faster now, as if the storm itself were determined to keep them from finding their way home. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Claire saw the flicker of light through the snow, the cabin. They had made it back. She pushed the door open, her breath shallow and fast from the cold, and stepped inside, bringing Lily in with her. The warmth of the fire felt like a miracle, but Claire knew the worst wasn't over yet. Jack was still out there, somewhere. And she had to find him before it was too late. The wind howled louder than before, slamming against the cabin as if trying to break through the walls. Claire sat near the fire, her fingers tightly clutching Lily's hand. The little girl had fallen asleep again, but Claire could not rest. Her thoughts were consumed with Jack. The warmth of the cabin did little to ease her worry. She stared at the door, willing Jack to walk through it. Lily stirred beside her, her small body shifting under the blanket. Claire leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. Her thoughts were still heavy, the weight of Jack's absence dragging her down. As the storm raged outside, Claire couldn't help but feel like the blizzard was closing in on them. She had known it would be dangerous, but this storm, this blizzard, was different. It seemed to have a mind of its own, determined to tear apart everything in its path. And still, Jack had not returned. Time moved slowly in the cabin. The minutes turned into hours. Claire kept glancing at the clock, but the numbers seemed to mock her. How could time pass so slowly when Jack was out there, alone, battling the storm? Every second felt like a year. Suddenly, Claire's heart stopped as she heard a faint noise outside. It was a soft sound at first, something she almost thought was the wind. But then it came again, louder this time. A cry. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She stood up, her eyes wide with fear, straining to hear. The cry came once more, and this time Claire knew it was a voice. It wasn't Jack's, it was Lily's. "Lily!" Claire shouted, rushing to the door. She yanked it open, barely noticing the snow and wind as she stepped outside. The night was darker than before, the storm whipping around her with a force she had never felt. "Lily!" she cried again, her voice lost in the howl of the wind. She barely knew where to look. The snow swirled in every direction, and all she could see was white. Then she saw it, a small figure, stumbling through the storm, fighting against the snow. It was Lily. Claire's heart raced. She could barely breathe. Her little girl was out there, alone, in the middle of the blizzard. Claire took a deep breath and ran towards her, her legs heavy in the thick snow. "What are you doing out here?" Claire cried, reaching out to her daughter, who was struggling to keep her footing. Lily's face was pale, her cheeks flushed from the cold, but her eyes were bright with determination. "I'm looking for Jack, Mommy," she said, her voice muffled by the wind. "He said he would come back." Claire's heart twisted in her chest. She knelt down to scoop Lily into her arms, her tears mixing with the snow. "Lily, no, you can't be out here. It's too dangerous." She held her tight, the warmth of her daughter's small body bringing a rush of comfort amid the storm's cold. "I wanted to help him, Mommy," Lily whispered, her small hands clutching at Claire's coat. "I knew he would come back." "I knew he wouldn't leave us." Claire kissed the top of her daughter's head, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. "We'll go back to the cabin. You're safe now, sweetheart."
"You don't need to be out here anymore."
"But As Claire turned to carry Lily back inside, she froze. There, standing just beyond the cabin, was a figure in the snow. Claire squinted against the wind. Was it Jack? Jack, she called, her voice shaking. The figure moved, and Claire's heart skipped a beat. The man was limping, barely able to stay upright. But it was him. Jack. He was alive. Jack! Claire ran toward him, her legs barely able to carry her through the deep snow. The wind was relentless, but she pushed forward.
Claire.
Lily. Jack's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. He stumbled toward her, his face pale and weathered by the storm. His coat was covered in snow, and his body seemed exhausted, as if he had been fighting the storm for hours. His steps were slow, uneven, and Claire could see that he was struggling to stay on his feet. "Jack, you're here! You're safe!" Claire cried, her voice trembling with relief. She reached him just in time to catch him as he collapsed in her arms. His weight was too much for her to hold, but she managed to keep him upright. I couldn't find my way back," Jack said, his words slurred. His eyes were barely open, his body trembling from the cold. The storm, it came out of nowhere. I couldn't make it back. I thought I'd never see you again. Claire's heart broke as she held him, her fingers brushing the snow from his face. "It's okay, Jack. You're here now. We're together. That's all that matters." Jack's eyes fluttered closed, and for a moment Claire feared that he might fall unconscious. But then he looked at her, his gaze still full of regret. "I'm sorry. I should have never left you." "I shouldn't have left Lily alone." Claire shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "You did what you thought was right. We're here. We're together. That's what matters." With all the strength she could muster, Claire helped Jack inside the cabin. The warmth of the fire hit them like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the storm outside seemed far away. But the relief in the cabin was fleeting. Jack was barely able to stay conscious, his body worn out from the battle against the storm. His breath was shallow, and Claire could see how much he had been affected. "Jack, stay with me. Please," Claire pleaded as she helped him sit near the fire. Lily, still holding on to her mother, looked up at Jack, her eyes wide with concern. "Is Daddy going to be okay, Mama?" "He's going to be okay, sweetie. We're all going to be okay." Jack managed a weak smile, his hand reaching out to touch Lily's head. "I'm sorry, little one," he said softly. "I should have never let you out in the storm. I'm just glad you're okay." Lily, ever so strong, smiled back at him. "I knew you'd come back. I just knew you would." Claire's heart swelled with love for both of them, but she couldn't shake the lingering fear. The storm was still raging outside, and they were far from safe. But for the first time that night, Claire allowed herself to believe that maybe everything would be all right. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the cabin, its warm glow lighting up the room. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, the world felt safer. Jack sat near the fire, his body wrapped in blankets, his face pale and drawn. The exhaustion from the storm weighed heavily on him, and Claire could see how hard he was fighting to stay awake. Lily, ever the curious and strong little girl, sat next to her mother, her small hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea. Her eyes kept glancing at Jack, who was resting with his back against the wall, trying to regain some strength. She could tell something had changed in him, but she wasn't sure what. He was still her hero, but something about the storm seemed to have broken him in ways she couldn't understand. Claire watched her daughter for a moment, the concern she had felt for her so strong just hours ago still fresh in her heart. But now, Lily was safe and Jack was here. The storm had stolen their peace, but it had also brought them closer. She could feel it in the air, the unspoken bond that now tied them all together. "Jack," Claire said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "How are you feeling?" Jack's eyes fluttered open, and he turned his head to meet her gaze. He smiled weakly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll be all right, Claire. Just a little worn out." But Claire could see the deeper exhaustion in him. It wasn't just physical. It was something more. Something the storm had left behind. She sat down beside him, taking his hand in hers. "You don't have to hide it from me, you know," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You've been through a lot. We've all been through a lot." Jack let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging as he leaned back against the wall. "I didn't think I was going to make it back," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "The storm was worse than I expected. I didn't realize how badly it had taken hold of me. But when I saw Lily, when I saw her out there in the snow, I didn't care what happened to me. I just needed to get back to you both."
You did it, Jack.
You made it back to us. And we're all here, together, safe. That's what matters. Jack's gaze softened as he looked at Lily, who was now sitting by the fire, her small face illuminated by the flickering light. He smiled, a faint smile that was filled with gratitude. I don't deserve to be here. I shouldn't have left you. I shouldn't have put Lily in danger. But she's stronger than I gave her credit for. I never thought she would be the one to find her way through the storm. Claire shook her head. She's stronger because of you, Jack. You've shown her what it means to keep going, even when things are hard. And that's what makes you both stronger. Together. Jack's eyes lingered on Lily for a moment before he spoke again. I promised myself I'd never leave you two behind. That promise still stands. I'm here now, and I'll do everything I can to keep you safe. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand still holding his tightly. The world outside was dark and cold, but inside they had warmth. They had each other. And that was enough. Lily stood up and walked over to Jack, her little feet patting softly on the cabin floor. She climbed up onto his lap, her small hands resting on his chest. Jack looked down at her, his heart swelling with love. I knew you'd come back, Daddy, Lily said softly, her voice full of certainty. You always keep your promises. Jack smiled, his eyes filling with tears as he kissed the top of her head. I'll never break that promise again. I promise you that. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind howling outside, the crackle of the fire, and the quiet breath of the family sitting together in the warmth of the cabin. It was a fragile peace, but it was theirs. And in that moment, it felt like the only thing that mattered. The storm outside still howled, but it no longer seemed as threatening. The wind might still rage, the snow might still fall, but Jack, Claire, and Lily had survived the worst of it. The storm had taken something from them, but it had also given them something, an understanding of what it meant to be family. Family wasn't just about being together when things were easy. It was about sticking together when the world was cold and uncertain. It was about being there for each other, no matter how hard it got. As the hours passed, the storm slowly began to die down. The howling winds grew softer, and the snow began to fall more gently, covering the world outside in a blanket of quiet white. The fire burned low, casting soft shadows across the cabin walls. Jack and Claire sat together, their arms wrapped around each other, their hearts beating in sync. Lily had fallen asleep once more, her small body curled up in Jack's arms. Claire looked at them both, her heart full. This, she whispered, more to herself than to Jack, is what Christmas is about, being together, no matter what. You're right, he said softly. This is all I need. This is enough.